Hey everybody, this is Dan, the Renewed Rewilder. I hope I'm not the Renewed Rewilder. I hope that there's a whole lot more of us out there. I know that there are. So I wanted to make another video in my series about rewilding and the Bible. And today, I don't have my Bible with me. I didn't carry it down here. So I'm going to make references just from memory, and I'm not really good at saying, oh, it's exactly this chapter or exactly this verse, but the content is there. And I'm going to be speaking more conceptually anyway. So my purpose is not like to provide, a precise Bible study or something. Anyway, all that said, today I wanted to talk about the idea of diet, and especially when it comes to the concept of, a lot of people talk about how are we created to eat, and there's a lot of religious ideas about diet and what we should and should not eat, things to avoid, restrictions, things like that. So I want to say first off that if you are a member of a religious group that places a lot of emphasis on diet and dietary rules, I of course respect your liberty to be in those groups and to have those views, but I don't see that the Bible supports using religion or religious teachings or using the structure of the church to perpetuate ideas of diet. So I'm just going to say that right off the bat, and some people might not agree, but I just wanted to put that stance out there right at the bat that I'm working from that general perspective. I believe that diet is something that is often used to create rules of religion that can distract from the reality of relationship. And so I'm going into this video with some trepidation because I don't want to create some other, I don't want to foist ideas on the people who watch this video and make people think, oh, here's just another set of rules for diet. You probably won't get that anyway, just because of what my views are. But when we look at Eden and we look at the origins of humankind as recorded in Genesis, what we see is Adam and Eve were obviously created in the garden, and it seems that there was no actual death until after the fall, after sin entered the world. And if there was no actual death, then it seems that there was no eating of meat, which would then imply that Adam and Eve were vegetarians. And I think that that's pretty broadly accepted, that Adam and Eve were vegetarians. Then after the fall, after they sinned and sin entered the world, and through them sin affected all of creation, then death entered the world. That's when God slew an animal, which I covered in a previous video. God slew at least I think I covered it in a previous video. So they made fig leaves for themselves, and they took fig leaves and made aprons for themselves. Then God basically says, hey, that's not enough. Fig leaves won't do it. And so he in person kills an animal and skins it and provides clothing to cover them at that time. And there's other things you can talk about, like, oh, what was the significance of the clothing? Was it just because they were naked? And like nakedness is wrong. Personally, I don't think it is, but we can talk about that in a later video. Anyways, so that's when death entered the world. Physical death. The first example we see is an animal being sacrificed by God, obviously in a person form, God, like a Christophany, where God shows up in a tangible form and does this act and shows them that, I almost slipped. I'm down by the river, and there's a lot of fresh sediment laid down here that makes the riverbank really slick. So then we don't see necessarily, although, okay, there's a mention where God says, after creating man and woman, he says that every tree and green plant and herb is given for their food. So that also is a strong implication that they were vegetarians, and also that the other creatures of the earth ate vegetarian diets. So after the fall, and after God sacrifices this animal and provides covering for them, we don't see an explicit mention that they started eating meat. However, I think that it can be strongly implied and reasonably deduced that since the vegetarian state or the vegetarian diet was a part of the perfect creation, and now after the fall, there's thorns and thistles and things become hard and things like that, that the vegetarian diet was not necessarily a feature of the post-fall existence. But we don't really see anything explicitly discussing this until basically after the flood. And after the flood, when God is speaking to Noah, and he gives the Noahic law, I think it's called Noahic covenant. Anyway, in that he talks about that all of the animals of earth would fear the descendants of Noah. So with the animals of the earth fearing the descendants of Noah, I read that as a pretty clear reference to hunting, and that the animals of the earth would learn that where humans roam, that they are in danger. So that's the first time that we really see what seems to be a direct reference to carnivorous diet. Now, if we back up, we can see in the sacrifices of Cain and Abel, Abel brought a sacrifice of an animal, and that sacrifice was acceptable to the Lord. Cain brought a sacrifice of vegetables. That sacrifice was not acceptable to the Lord. That makes me think that the Lord had already explained, probably at that first sacrifice when he provided coverings for Adam and Eve, he probably explained to them that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. I don't think that he killed an animal just to put skins around them. I believe that at that time, God explained to them that sin is shameful. I don't think he was saying that their bodies are shameful. I think he was saying that sin is shameful, and that sin needs redemption. And in the Old Testament picture, what we see is not full redemption. We see covering of sin. And then in the New Testament, we see redemption from sin. So I believe that those concepts were in place. And animal sacrifices had continued, certainly, after the Garden of Eden. And it's very likely that the people consumed the animals they ate, because they would not want those animals to just go to waste. They're sacrificed, but that doesn't mean that they magically disappear from the ground where they were sacrificed. So we also know that in later sacrificial systems in Israel, that the animals were consumed. There was no, some of them were burnt, just flat out burnt, but a lot of them were consumed as well. So we do see the killing of animals by Adam and Eve and their descendants. Admittedly, I'm implying that into the story, but I think it can be strongly implied and strongly deduced, because otherwise how did Cain and Abel know the difference between sacrifices? And why would Cain be held accountable for a wrong kind of sacrifice? So then we go forward to Noah. We see God telling Noah that he and his descendants, that the fear of man would be in the animals of the earth. Then later on, we see references. From there, we really don't even need to try to prove a point or anything. I mean, it's just very clear that all through the rest of the narrative of the Bible, that there's animal death at the hands of people that is required by God. Some of those instances, it wasn't the requirement, such as sacrifices. It wasn't the requirement. It was just where, you know, where someone kills an animal and they eat it, and it's part of an account that is blessed by God. Or there's also mentions of, say, where, God calls Canaan the land flowing with milk and honey. And the fact that he would present that as a positive thing for the children of Israel to anticipate would imply that that it was within his will, and that God himself was portraying as a blessing the presence of animal-derived foods. So right there, I will say, if anyone wants to try to use the Bible to support veganism, they are simply theologically wrong, and they really need to rethink their position. So kind of where I'm going with this video is turning out kind of long, and I didn't mean it to, but kind of where I'm going with this is, for the Rewilder, we often talk about that, returning to as pure of a state as we can. The fact is that because of sin, we can't return to a pure state. Not until Christ fully renews us and everything is made new. So how far back do we go as Rewilders? As a certified nutritional therapist, I do not believe that I already mentioned veganism. I don't think veganism is theologically correct. I don't think it's ethically correct. I don't think it's philosophically correct. And I know that it is not nutritionally accurate to say that that is an optimal diet. So, veganism, that's out. Vegetarianism, though, where you might still include dairy, you might include eggs, fish, some things like that. You could make a point for that because you are still including animal foods and animal proteins. So I think for the Rewilder, where we're talking about reclaiming some wild state of being, some pre-civilized state of being for human beings, and how we lived at some ancestral point in the past, I think that there's a strong case to be made for the hunter-gatherer lifestyle or hunter-gatherer diet. I guess you would say, for not everybody is it going to be a lifestyle, but as a diet, a strong case can be made. I philosophically, I postulate, or I personally believe that as sin has continued to corrupt the world and more sin is poured out onto the soil of earth, that man also becomes more and more dependent upon animal flesh. That's part of the fall, and it's part of the curse. And it just seems logical to me that as we progress further into blanketing the earth with sin, that the results of sin would also be further necessitated. That's not to say that when we kill an animal to eat it, that it's a sacrifice that covers our sin. But I do believe that as the diseases of mankind progress, and those diseases are a result of the fall, that as the diseases of mankind progress, that we become more and more dependent on nutrient-dense foods that are able to heal us better than other foods. And the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet are animal foods, especially organ meats. So it just makes sense to me that as we as a race become more and more degraded through our sin and through illness and all these things, that just biologically we need more meat. We need more meat, and especially organ meats. And so that's just a progression. Maybe I should flesh that out further in a different video, because otherwise this video is already long and it'll become a lot longer if I really stay on that subject. For the Rewilder, I do not see any reason why you should try to go back to Eden and eat only plant foods. I don't see any reason why you should limit yourself to a simple vegetarian diet where you're having dairy, eggs, fish. We certainly see all throughout the Bible at events blessed by God, we see the consumption of red meat, things like that. Also, I do not support the idea that going back to an ancestral state of diet means going back to the ancient Jewish system of sacrificing and eating, and that in modern days we would call it kosher, but kosher is actually not the ancient way of doing it. But we don't need to go back to the Levitical system of how we source food. If you want to, that's fine. Just make sure that you're obeying the entire law, which means if your wife commits adultery, you should stone her. Or that, if you have any kind of leakage of body fluids, wink, wink, that you need to wait for 7 days and then go take a ritual bath. So if you're not really obeying the entire law, you might not want to worry about the dietary part either, because it's all one law with many, many parts to it. Anyway, those are my thoughts so far. I've probably already said enough to get into a lot of trouble and to have a lot of people argue with me. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it here, and I do sincerely look forward to people posting their thoughts. I'm not just like, oh, give me comments under my video so that it helps my rating. I'm literally doing this. I have this channel because I enjoy conversation. I enjoy iron sharpening iron. I enjoy sharing ideas and having other people share ideas with me. And I enjoy being able to get into conversations about things like this. So please, 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 feel free to leave your comments below the video. If you have any questions about my views, if you have any commentary to make about them, if you have any thoughts about the subject, I just ask that you be polite, be nice. I'm not out here trying to hurt anybody, but I recognize that some people might strongly disagree with my views. And that is all. This is the Renewed Rewilder.